Killing is addictive. The soldiers were so mad that they grabbed an 8-year-old kid and then they stabbed him. The child's head fell to the ground. The people around them gulped nervously. They were afraid that they would be next. No one dared say a word, and Ford, a patrolman, was shocked, even though he knew this 8-year-old kid. But he was just a little patrolman in front of soldiers who kill without a second thought. He could only remain silent. Ford never wanted to be a patrolman in the first place. He learned his trade in a framing store, but it was a bad time. The store closed soon after. Ford couldn't find a decent job. He felt bad about it. He crouched by the post in front of his house, sighing and sighing. By chance, he met Mr. Dell, an old patrolman. He'd seen it all before. He told Ford that the world was too chaotic. It's hard to do business. There's no peace of mind. Why don't you join him and become a patrolman? That's $6 a month. At least it's a job. Ford thought about it. Mr. Zhao has a point. He could make a living as a patrolman. So, on Mr. Zhao's recommendation, he reported to the police station the next morning, and he became a patrolman. But in those days, patrolmen were not a decent job. The people didn't like them. They even called them foot patrols. Ford didn't like it either, but for the sake of his newborn child, I had to be a patrolman. When Ford went to work, he was teased by others. Even the kids teased him. That night, Ford was out on the street as usual. He saw the streets were deserted. The stores were all closed, and he was afraid to go on. He walked forward boldly. Suddenly, he heard a couple of gunshots, and he encountered soldiers killing people. He was so scared. He hid in a store. The shopkeeper told Ford, "There's been a mutiny outside." When he heard that, Ford decided to go to the police station to get help. In order not to reveal his identity, he asked the shopkeeper to lend him a coat. As soon as he left the house, he was afraid to leave, but the boss locked the door. He had no choice but to go forward. Ford came to the station. He said there was a mutiny outside. The soldiers were killing and looting and were very evil. They needed the patrolmen to go out and protect the people. But the scene Ford had envisioned, where everyone would be on the same side. But the scene Ford had envisioned, there was only laughter. No one stepped forward to help. Ford was at a loss. He didn't understand what it meant to be a patrolman. The patrolman next to him whispered to Ford, "We can't handle the mutiny. $6 a month. No one's a fool. We don't need to get killed." The commissioner knew all about it, but he didn't know. Only the new guy, Ford, makes a big deal out of it. Even the chief has the same attitude. Ford's a small-time patrolman. What can he do? At first light, Ford was out on the streets again, facing the fierce soldiers, and not only could he not fight them, but he had to salute them. He had to salute them. A child who disobeys an order for disobeying an order. It was a time of fear. Luckily, a new coup d'etat took place to put an end to all this fighting, but the good times Ford imagined didn't come. The so-called democracy, republic, freedom and equality. Turns out it was all just a bunch of talk. Ford got a new uniform and a new job, watching over the homes of high-ranking officials. I thought it would be a simple job, nothing to do but stand guard at the gate. There was nothing else to do, but I didn't realize there were too many people coming and going. No matter who entered, they had to salute. In one morning alone, I saluted more than 80 people. I'm so tired. I can't even lift my arms, and there's no dignity at all. Any one of the servants can't make them do it. Ford couldn't help but complain to his fellow patrolmen about how exhausting the job was. Ford wanted to report it to the chief, but even the commissioner was a high-ranking official. Who else could he report it to? He'd just go and get the OPM for them. What Ford didn't realize was, even a man as powerful as the chief wasn't always a man of honor. Ford saw him fawning over the Japanese. He was bowing so much that his head was on the floor. He was a bit puzzled. Shortly afterward, the newspapers published Article 21. Ford didn't know what it meant. A student explained it to him. Article 21 means that the Japanese should be in charge of Chinese land. The Japanese move into your house, and you're not allowed to object. If you have money, you have to ask the Japanese for it. If you don't have money, you can't say a word, even if you starve to death. This is the end of the country. Do you understand? Ford realized why there are so many Japanese. There are so many Japanese coming to the official's house. As a Chinese, he wanted to march with the students, but his job as a patrolman, he was counting on it to support his family. There was nothing he could do. Ford had to persuade the students to leave, to avoid a confrontation with the police before a clash with the officers. But the students were not afraid. They rushed into the officer's house. They fought the soldiers to the end. The student rebellion began. Not only were the officials driven away, Ford was promoted to the rank of inspector. He lived in peace for a while, but who knew that this was a stopgap measure to calm the public's anger. He he was back in no time and became a bigger official. And his nephew, just because he speaks a few words of Japanese, he became chief of police. Ford was removed from his post. He's back to working as a gatekeeper for high-ranking officials. Ford complained to Mr. Zhao about the injustice of the world. Those officials are making money everywhere. They pay $50 for a bottle of perfume, but the poor sell their children for $30. Mr. Zhou laughed and said Ford was still young. That's the way it is in this world. Even though Ford is a patrolman, but he's just a bully. The people think they're bullies. The officials don't treat them as human beings. They've been pissed off all over the place. They don't even get a raise in pay. They're not as free as beggars on the street. Mr. Zhao couldn't figure out why he became a police officer in the first place. He can't control soldiers killing people, nor can he control the high officials smoking cigarettes. At most, he could bully the common people to control thieves. Ford was furious. When will these days end? He's yelling at the students for not starting a revolution, but he can't even protect his own family. The Japanese have a crush on a beautiful woman. They asked Ford to tell them where she lived. They didn't realize she was their son's wife. They asked where she was. Ford pointed in the right direction. He watched the Japanese humming as he walked into his son's wife's room. Ford stared painfully at the roster and sighed deeply, but he could only watch his daughter-in-law suffer. Ford smacked himself in the face. He hated himself for being so useless. Angrily, his son asked to join the army to fight against Japanese tyranny. Ford could only agree. Ever since Hui became a patrolman, his son became more and more unhappy. Watching the Japanese burning and looting, innocent people suffering, he couldn't stand it. He didn't want to be a slave. He wanted to fight back, but Ford wouldn't let him. His wife died young. Daughter married off a couple years ago. He's left with his son. He's in his 50s. He doesn't want his son to join the army and lose his life. Hui saw his father like this. He had to give up on the idea for the time being. But this time, after seeing his daughter-in-law dragged away, Ford finally came to his senses. He said goodbye to his son with tears in his eyes. It's been 8 years since Hui left. Ford was getting old. Although the war was won, there was still no news of his son. In Beijing, there's no sign of victory in the war. Not only have the traitors not been punished, not only did the traitors continue to be promoted, even the Japanese have been sent back to China in one piece. Ford had to live with his anger. Ford got old. He lost his job as a patrolman. He had no source of income. He lost his savings. He had to beg for a living. Not only did he not have enough to eat, he doesn't even have a decent cotton coat. He could only squat by the post in front of his house, squatting by the pillar in front of the house, hoping for the victory of the revolution, expecting his son to come back to him. But the snow got heavier and heavier. Ford died in the winter night before dawn. In the end, his son didn't come back. He may have died on the battlefield.